Book Talk begins at 18 minutes and 20 seconds. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 621, Pickles. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by its listeners. Well, hello. How are you? I am feeling nostalgic, is what I am. So it's been an interesting couple of weeks because as Eric and Jemuel and I have started getting an Etsy store back up and running, it means that I've been going back through old shop and old patterns, and it made me think of the old days and how different the whole world was when CraftLit started in 2006, but also how much it changed after 2015. And so thinking about the old days made me think about the kids and things that the kids did online, which made me think of Mam Shmam, who I don't know if you guys remember, but back in 2006, this kid in Australia, Mam Shmam, that's not his actual name. His actual name is Callum, and he's a grown-up now and has a lovely Instagram site too. He did claymation, which had a huge impact on my kids. And there were TomSka's ASDF because he thought it was hilarious because it was the first 4 letters in the left hand of the keyboard. And he did goofy comics, and that made me think of EddsWorld, which is a whole other sad tunnel to go down. But I went back and I looked at some of these things, and a lot of them were the ways that I remembered them, which was nice. But I could also see that the old spirit, the old podcasting gig of pick up a mic and share your passion with other people who have the same passion, it was so much easier back then. And then, of course, that leads me to think about Serial and the audio essay that I did about Serial and how I predicted it would change everything that we were doing. And boy, was I right. And then that made me think about Dracula, because I seem to recall that back during Dracula, it was somewhere between Dracula and Three Men in a Boat. I did some research on the Victorian world and how the impact of trains and timetables for trains and how much faster you could get things done and all of that really freaked a lot of people out in the Victorian world. And not for nothing, that doesn't sound a whole lot different from things that I've said, things that I've heard other people say about now. I think the thing that's interesting to me is the pandemic really showed a spotlight on how fast everything had gotten, I think, because so many of us were forced to slow down. And I remember those early days when nobody knew what was going on and we were all supposed to stay home, although we were allowed to go for walks. And Aiden and I did, and we went walking a lot, and there were no cars on the road. And you could hear the birds. And it was beautiful, which is very conflicting because, of course, it was a horrible reason for it, but it was beautiful to have that pause. And then I started thinking, especially post-pandemic, there's been so much more discussion about neurodivergency and anxiety and depression. And for a long time, I think we were able to make excuses about how much our world had sped up since Victorian times. And, you know, kids could say, oh, you old people, you just can't keep up. Which is true in large part. I cannot play games, video games, the way that my kids do. They are absolutely digital natives. But even though their hand-eye coordination in response to game times is vastly better than anyone my age, I think, unless you're, totally devoted to spending your life playing games, our brains haven't really changed a whole lot. We still crave and need the same things we've always craved and needed: companionship, quiet time, time to think, time to create. It's one of the things that I think makes CraftLit listeners so awesome, is because you do actually find time to sit back with a piece of classic fiction, which you can't read quickly, and you create things while you're listening, which to me seems like a really, really healthy thing to do. Obviously, I wouldn't still be doing this after all these years if I didn't think it was healthy. But I can't help but wonder if the rates of anxiety and depression that we're seeing in tweens and teenagers doesn't have something to do with the fact that our world is just too fast for our brains, even if you are a digital native. And because the internet is weird, and because I probably said something about this out loud, the next time I got onto Etsy, I found a cute little Dracula bag. It's like a little makeup bag that has a bat on it. It's Dracula. I'm linking out to it because I just thought it was so cute, but because the internet is weird. But then, I really felt the need for something slow and calming to kind of pull me down while I was painting. And I pulled up a YouTube channel. I don't know if I've shared it with you before. I think I may have mentioned it. Baumgartner Restoration. This guy, Mr. Baumgartner, is young. He's cute. I mean, he's young. He's younger than me. He's cute. He has a wonderful voice. It's not ASMR. It could be, but he's very calming. And he does a beautiful job with the photography, taking you through restoring these amazing oil paintings. The Come Hither episode, which I think was released pretty recently, is phenomenal. Not because what he's doing is so complicated, but because the change to the painting is so pronounced. And it's just lovely to watch someone take the time and the care and the affection to bring something that had taken so much time and care to create, to bring it back to life, to its original or close to its original state. And that led on my feed to another restoration video, which actually frustrated me a lot because I wanted to know more about what they were doing. Baumgartner does a great job of explaining how and why. This other one was not good at explaining the how or the why, with a few noted exceptions. But I didn't know that you could resuscitate a watercolor painting at all until I saw that. The amount of work that goes into that kind of conservatorship is not surprisingly massive, but it is a very quiet video as well, and also just fascinating to watch. And that made me, I don't know why, think about pickles. Someone is going to have to call in and talk to me about pickles. 206-350-1642. Here's why. I don't know why my kind of deep dive into nostalgia led me to pickles. Andrew doesn't like them. Aiden is okay about them. Aaron loves bread and butter pickles, but didn't know that they were called bread and butter pickles, and didn't know that they were called bread and butter pickles because, and this could be apocryphal, but it is what I both remembered and what I've read recently. During the Depression, there were a lot of cucumber sandwiches because you could get cucumbers. That was pretty easy. And you could usually get bread and, you hope, butter. So you'd have bread and butter and you'd put cucumber on it because at least that's something in between the bread and the butter. Or you could put pickles on it. Bread and butter pickles, sweet pickles. So I went looking for a bread and butter pickle recipe. Yes. So I did. I have the ball. It's either the bell jars or the ball jars. I think it's ball. They make a bread and butter pickle mix. That's the salty, briny part. And I kind of combined their recipe with another recipe that I found on YouTube. I did not cook my cukes. I wanted them to be a little bit crispy. I did use the bread and butter pickle briny bit to soak them in ice water before I canned them. But oh my God, the house this weekend smelled like pickle vinegar. It smelled so good. And then, because I went to a farmer's market early Saturday morning and bought all the fruit in the world, I also bought a whole watermelon. And I'd been thinking about this for a while. Well, maybe that's why my brain went back to pickles. Mom, if you're listening, before we go to the beach, skip the next 2 minutes. Okay, now that she's not here, I made a batch of watermelon pickles because I remember as a kid, I remember everybody eating them around me and I was afraid of them. And I think it's because the ones that they had access to had the rind still on it, which just freaked me out. Either way, I made them sans rind, and I have linked to the 2 videos that I used to kind of meld into one recipe. They both have different things going on, but the main core of the recipe that I used came from a 1935 cookbook that was given out for free by a whiskey distillery. You can get copies of this thing on eBay. It just cracks me up. Very few of the recipes have whiskey in it. It really was just like a service during the Depression, trying to get people stuff that they could cook that tasted good, that they could cook for cheap. And what a great PR campaign for your distillery, especially something to sell during Prohibition, because what else are you going to do? So they were great. Mom's probably back by now. They were great. And I'm taking them to the beach. And I'll surprise everybody. So yeah, that's where I've been. I've been in nostalgic pickle land. I don't know what that means. But that's where I went. You know, still working on the Etsy store. The big deal right now is working on getting art up on the Etsy store, both original watercolors that would be watercolors that are actually my hand brush and watercolor and paint, pigment and paper, prints of some of the watercolors I've done. And we're working on getting some of Aiden's art up there as well as prints. It gets pretty complicated when you look at copyright and licensing and trying to protect your art, but we're working on that. So that could take a little while longer to do. The other thing that I'm going to be putting up on Etsy is photo cards, sets of photos as cards or postcards that are the pictures that I've taken, some of the pictures I've taken over my last, 2 years of walking across the Delaware every morning. It's a beautiful location, and it's been very interesting tracking how different the river looks, from the same vantage point often, but how different the river looks at different times of the morning and different seasons. So yeah, that's what's coming. So far, we have the Relentlessly Curious mug. I cannot remember who it was who interviewed me early on during the podcast lifespan. I think it was even before we left Arizona. So that would have been before 2011. Somebody interviewed me. She's a listener. I hope she's still listening and contacts me because I feel like a total heel. But she was the one who said, sum yourself up in a word or two. And I was like, blah, 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 blah. How do I sum up me? Blah. And she said, well, I always think of you as being relentlessly curious. And boy, is that stuck with me because, yeah, I think we all are, though, right? I mean, you wouldn't be listening if you weren't crazy curious about interesting, funky, weird things, right? Is it just me? Anyway, there's a relentlessly curious mug now in the shop, and one piece of Jen Minnis art, original Jen Minnis art from back at the very beginning when she donated those pieces of art to the show. And one of the pieces of art on the mug is my watercolor painting. It's a whimsical one of the Bucks County Playhouse. So we'll keep updating things. I have a new What Would Madame Defarge Knit graphic that I am very happy with. It's so much better than the one we had in like 2007. So there's going to be some What Would Madame Defarge Knit tees and bags. And, let us know what you're interested in, especially over at Patreon or on the Patreon Discord. Please, please, please don't hesitate to hit up me or Jemuel or Eric and let us know what you're looking for. Oh, I know. I also got really frustrated with Etsy because unlike on YouTube, where if you have other creators who you want your channel to link out to as a, if you enjoy CraftLit, you might also enjoy blah, 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 blah. On Etsy, you can't do that as a shop owner. And that really ticks me off because to me, Etsy used to be a community of people who made things by hand. It was people who wrote patterns. It was people who uploaded graphic designs and made t-shirts or silk screens or fidget toys or jewelry. It really was a smaller, weirder conglomeration of crafters. It's obviously, like everything else, much bigger and much more commercial now, but I really wanted to link my relentlessly curious shop to other crafty people, CraftLit people. So if you have an Etsy shop, go take a look at what I've done on the About section of the Relentlessly Curious shop. Actually, I don't think it's the About. I think I had to put it in as an announcement so it would show up on the shop page. And you will have to click See More because they only give you a very short piece of space to put an announcement there. But I am linking out to other shops in the CraftLit community. So if you have a shop and you want me to post you there as part of the CraftLit family, please let me know. You can write heather@craftlit.com. You can call 206-350-1642, or you can go to linktr.ee, Linktree/CraftLit channel, and that'll take you to all the places where you need to go, including SpeakPipe if you are out of the country and don't want to call long distance. Okay, so that's everything. Book. I don't have a whole lot of notes for the book today. I can tell you that in chapter 16, we've got 2 chapters today. Chapter 16, there's a story about a chancellor. And okay, how do I say this politely? When boys are young and hitting puberty, there are lots of things you can do to distract them from thinking about people who they're attracted to, to a greater or lesser degree of success. There is a bell ringing instruction that is given to a particularly lustful young man who is going into the church. It is one of the funniest pieces of Dumas writing I think I've ever come across. And it didn't strike me at first, like, wait a minute. Did he just... And I had to go back a little bit and listen to it all over again. And yes, just pay attention for the bell ringing. So good. And this particular chancellor, he pops up again later in the story, so don't forget him. And the whole bell ringing thing is a setup for what he has to say/do with the queen in this chapter. Also, Monsieur Laporte, He is the Queen's gentleman in waiting. He is also Constance Bonacieux's godfather. So that's that connection. In our second chapter today, chapter 17, there's a reference to justice not being one of the things that Solomon lists as leaving no traces of their passage. All right, I had no idea what I was talking about. So I went and I looked up Proverbs, chapter 30, verses 18 and 19. Solomon says, or actually, we think it's somebody else says, there are three things that they don't understand. No, four. And it's interesting because it's written like it's a correction. The way of an eagle in the sky, that's the first one. The way of a serpent upon a rock, that's the second one. The way of a ship in the midst of the sea, that's the third one. Those are three things that leave no trace that they were there, that they happened. And then the last one is how a man loves a woman. And the subtext there is, if you're a husband, it's impossible to know if your wife's been with some other guy. Apparently, that is the way that text is often being taken. I don't know if that's true. But what I did find is way back in 2005, when people were still writing blogs, there was an interesting listserv thread about this passage. And somebody else saying, what are they talking about? And one person wrote in and said, I actually don't think it's the Proverbs thing that Dumas is referencing. There is a book, part of the Apocrypha, called The Wisdom of Solomon. And in The Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 5, verses 8 through 12, he talks about the three things that leave no trace of their passage as being pride, wealth, and boastfulness. I'm linking out to this for you as well if you want to see the actual chapter 5. The passage says, this is actually verse 7, we wearied ourselves in the way of wickedness and destruction. Yea, we have gone through deserts where there lay no way. But as for the way of the Lord, we have not known it. And then verse 8, this is the beginning of the part that the writer thought Dumas was referring to. What hath pride profited us? Or what good hath riches with our vaunting brought us? All those things are passed away like a shadow, and as a post that is hastened by. And as a ship that passeth over the waves of the water, which when it is gone by, the trace thereof cannot be found, neither the pathway of the keel in the waves. Or as when a bird hath flown through the air, there is no token of her way to be found. But the light air being beaten with the stroke of her wings and parted with the violent noise and motion of them is passed through, and therein afterwards no sign where she went is to be found. Or like as with an arrow is shot at the mark, it parteth the air, which immediately cometh together again, so that a man cannot know where it went through. Even so, we in like manner, as soon as we are born, begin to draw to our end, and had no sign of virtue to show, but were consumed in our own wickedness. And then he goes on, blah, 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 but the righteous live forevermore, their reward, blah, you know, how it's going to end up is positive. But pride, wealth, and boastfulness, it's all Solomon saying you can't take it with you. And Dumas' point is justice is not one of those things. Justice does leave a mark. And that is worth remembering, I think. Just as a quick reminder, where we ended the last episode, was the cardinal telling the king that the Buckingham just left Paris that morning. All right. So here we go with chapters 16 and 17 of The Three Musketeers, written for us by Alexandre Dumas. And if you are listening to the alternative John Lee version that's from Tantor Audio, you can come back and listen to the flip side here at 1 hour, 26 minutes and 20 seconds. All right, here we go.
Chapter 16 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. In which Monsieur Séguier, keeper of the seals, looks more than once for the bell. It is impossible to form an idea of the impression these few words made upon Louis XIII. He grew pale and red alternately, and the cardinal saw at once that he had recovered by a single blow all the ground he had lost.
"Buckingham in Paris?" cried he. "And why does he come?"
"To conspire, no doubt, with your enemies, the Huguenots and the Spaniards."
"No, pardieu, no. To conspire against my honor with Madame de Chevreuse, Madame de Longueville, and the Conde."
"Oh, sire, what an idea! The queen is too virtuous, and besides, loves your majesty too well."
"Woman is weak, Monsieur Cardinal," said the king, "and as to loving me much, I have my own opinion as to that love."
"I not the less maintain," said the cardinal, "that the Duke of Buckingham came to Paris for a project wholly political."
"And I am sure that he came for quite another purpose, Monsieur Cardinal. But if the queen be guilty, let her tremble."
"Indeed," said the cardinal, "whatever repugnance I may have to directing my mind to such a treason, your majesty compels me to think of it. Madame de Lannoy, whom, according to your majesty's command, I have frequently interrogated, told me this morning that the night before last her majesty sat up very late, that this morning she wept much, and that she was writing all day."
"That's it!"
cried the king.
"To him, no doubt. Cardinal, I must have the queen's papers."
"But how to take them, sire? It seems to me that it is neither your majesty nor myself who can charge himself with such a mission."
"How did they act with regard to the Maréchal d'Ancre?"
cried the king in the highest state of choler.
"First, her closets were thoroughly searched, and then she herself."
"The Maréchal d'Ancre was no more than the Maréchal d'Ancre, a Florentine adventurer, sire, and that was all, while the august spouse of your majesty is Anne of Austria, Queen of France, that is to say, one of the greatest princesses in the world."
"She is not the less guilty, Monsieur Duke. The more she has forgotten the high position in which she was placed, the more degrading is her fall. Besides, I long ago determined to put an end to all these petty intrigues of policy and love. She has near her a certain Laporte."
"Who, I believe, is the mainspring of all of this, I confess," said the cardinal.
"You think, then, as I do, that she deceives me?"
said the king. "I believe, and I repeat it to your majesty, that the queen conspires against the power of the king, but I have not said against his honor."
"And I tell you against both. I tell you the queen does not love me. I tell you she loves another. I tell you she loves that infamous Buckingham. Why did you not have him arrested while in Paris?"
"Arrest the duke? Arrest the prime minister of King Charles I? Think of it, sire. What a scandal! And if the suspicions of your majesty, which I still continue to doubt, should prove to have any foundation, what a terrible disclosure! What a fearful scandal!"
"But as he exposed himself like a vagabond or a thief, he should have been—"
Louis XIII stopped, terrified at what he was about to say, while Richelieu, stretching out his neck, waited uselessly for the word which had died on the lips of the king. "He should have been—"
"Nothing," said the king. "Nothing. But all the time he was in Paris, you, of course, did not lose sight of him."
"No, sire."
"Where did he lodge?"
"Rue de la Harpe, number 75.
"Where is that?"
"By the side of the Luxembourg."
And you are certain that the Queen and he did not see each other?
I believe the Queen to have too high a sense of her duty, sire.
But they have corresponded. It is to him that the Queen was writing all the day. Monsieur Duke, I must have those letters.
Sire, notwithstanding...
Monsieur Duke, at whatever price it may be, I will have them.
I would, however, beg your majesty to observe...
Do you, then, also join in betraying me, Monsieur Cardinal, by thus always opposing my will? Are you also in accord with Spain and England, with Madame de Chevreuse and the Queen?
Sire, replied the cardinal, sighing, I believed myself secure from such a suspicion.
Monsieur Cardinal, you have heard me. I will have those letters.
There is but one way.
What is that?
That would be to charge Monsieur de Ségur, the keeper of the seals, with this mission. The matter enters completely into the duties of the post.
Let him be sent for, instantly.
He is most likely at my hotel. I requested him to call, and when I came to the Louvre, I left orders if he came, to desire him to wait.
Let him be sent for, instantly.
Your Majesty's orders shall be executed. But
what?
But the Queen will perhaps refuse to obey.
My orders?
Yes, if she is ignorant that these orders came from the King.
Well, that she may have no doubt on that head, I will go and inform her myself.
Your Majesty will not forget that I have done everything in my power to prevent a rupture.
Yes, Duke, yes. I know you are very indulgent toward the Queen. Too indulgent, perhaps. We shall have occasion, I warn you, at some future period to speak of that.
Whenever it shall please your Majesty, but I shall be always happy and proud, sire, to sacrifice myself to the harmony which I desire to see reign between you and the Queen of France.
Very well, Cardinal, very well. But, meantime, send for Monsieur the Keeper of the Seals. I will go to the Queen.
And Louis XIII, opening the door of communication, passed into the corridor which led from his apartments to those of Anne of Austria. The Queen was in the midst of her women, Madame de Guitaut, Madame de Sable, Madame de Montbazon, and Madame de Guimene. In a corner was the Spanish companion, Donna Estefania, who had followed her from Madrid. Madame Guimene was reading aloud, and everybody was listening to her with attention, with the exception of the Queen, who had, on the contrary, desired this reading in order that she might be able, while feigning to listen, to pursue the thread of her own thoughts. These thoughts, gilded as they were by a last reflection of love, were not the less sad. Anne of Austria, deprived of the confidence of her husband, pursued by the hatred of the cardinal, who could not pardon her for having repulsed a more tender feeling, having before her eyes the example of the queen mother whom that hatred had tormented all her life. Though Marie de Medicis, if the memoirs of the time are to be believed, had begun by according to the cardinal that sentiment which Anne of Austria always refused him. Anne of Austria had seen her most devoted servants fall around her, her most intimate confidants, her dearest favorites. Like those unfortunate persons endowed with a fatal gift, she brought misfortune upon everything she touched. Her friendship was a fatal sign which called down persecution. Madame de Chevreuse and Madame de Bernay were exiled, and Laporte did not conceal from his mistress that he expected to be arrested every instant. It was at the moment when she was plunged in the deepest and darkest of these reflections that the door of the chamber opened, and the king entered. The reader hushed herself instantly. All the ladies rose, and there was a profound silence. As to the king, he made no demonstration of politeness, only stopping before the queen.
"Madame,"
said he.
"You are about to receive a visit from the Chancellor, who will communicate certain matters to you with which I have charged him."
The unfortunate queen, who was constantly threatened with divorce, exile, and trial even, turned pale under her rouge and could not refrain from saying, "But why this visit, sire? What can the Chancellor have to say to me that your Majesty could not say yourself?" The king turned upon his heel without reply, and almost at the same instant the captain of the guards, Monsieur de Guiton, announced the visit of the Chancellor. When the Chancellor appeared, the king had already gone out by another door. The Chancellor entered half smiling, half blushing. As we shall probably meet with him again in the course of our history, it may be well for our readers to be made at once acquainted with him. This Chancellor was a pleasant man. He was de Roche-le-Masle, canon of Notre Dame, who had formerly been valet of a bishop, who introduced him to his Eminence as a perfectly devout man. The cardinal trusted him, and therein found his advantage. There are many stories related of him, and among them this. After a wild youth, he had retired into a convent, there to expiate, at least for some time, the follies of adolescence. On entering this holy place, the poor penitent was unable to shut the door so close as to prevent the passions he fled from entering with him. He was incessantly attacked by them, and the superior, to whom he had confided this misfortune, wishing as much as in him lay to free him from them, had advised him, in order to conjure away the tempting demon, to have recourse to the bell rope, and ring with all his might. At the denunciating sound, the monks would be rendered aware that temptation was besieging a brother, and all the community would go to prayers. This advice appeared good to the future chancellor. He conjured the evil spirit with abundance of prayers offered up by the monks. But the devil does not suffer himself to be easily dispossessed from a place in which he has fixed his garrison. In proportion as they redoubled the exorcisms, he redoubled the temptations, so that day and night the bell was ringing full swing, announcing the extreme desire for mortification which the penitent experienced. The monks had no longer an instant of repose. By day they did nothing but ascend and descend the steps which led to the chapel. At night, in addition to complines and matins, they were further obliged to leap 20 times out of their beds and prostrate themselves on the floor of their cells. It is not known whether it was the devil who gave way, or the monks who grew tired, but within 3 months the penitent reappeared in the world with the reputation of being the most terrible possessed that ever existed. On leaving the convent, he entered into the magistracy. Becoming president of the place of his uncle, embraced the cardinal's party, which did not prove want of sagacity, became chancellor, served his eminence with zeal in his hatred against the queen mother, and his vengeance against Anne of Austria, stimulated the judges in the affair of Calais, encouraged the attempts of Monsieur de Laffemas, chief gamekeeper of France, then, at length, invested with the entire confidence of the cardinal, a confidence which he had so well earned, he received the singular commission for the execution of which he presented himself in the queen's apartments. The queen was still standing when he entered, but scarcely had she perceived him than she reseated herself in her armchair and made a sign to her women to resume their cushions and stools, and with an air of supreme hauteur, said, "What do you desire, monsieur, and with what object do you present yourself here?" "To make, madame, in the name of the king, and without prejudice to the respect which I have the honor to owe to your majesty, a close examination into all your papers." "How, monsieur? An investigation of my papers? Mine? Truly, this is an indignity." "Be kind enough to pardon me, madam, but in this circumstance I am but the instrument which the king employs. Has not his majesty just left you? And has he not himself asked you to prepare for this visit?" "Search then, monsieur. I am a criminal as it appears. Estefania, give up the keys of my drawers and my desks." For form's sake, the Chancellor paid a visit to the pieces of furniture named, but he well knew that it was not in a piece of furniture that the Queen would place the important letter she had written that day. When the Chancellor had opened and shut 20 times the drawers of the secretaries, it became necessary, whatever hesitation he might experience, it became necessary, I say, to come to the conclusion of the affair, that is, to search the Queen herself. The Chancellor advanced, therefore, toward Anne of Austria, and said with a very perplexed and embarrassed air, "And now it remains for me to make the principal examination." "What is that?" asked the Queen, who did not understand, or rather was not willing to understand. "His Majesty is certain that a letter has been written by you during the day. He knows that it has not yet been sent to its address. This letter is not in your table, nor in your secretary, and yet this letter must be somewhere." "Would you dare to lift your hand to your Queen?" said Anne of Austria, drawing herself up to her full height and fixing her eyes upon the Chancellor with an expression almost threatening. "I am a faithful subject of the King, madame, and all that His Majesty commands I shall do." "Well, it is true," said Anne of Austria, "and the spies of the cardinal have served him faithfully. I have written a letter today. That letter is not yet gone. The letter is here." And the Queen laid her beautiful hand on her bosom. "Then give me that letter, madame," said the Chancellor. "I will give it to none but the King, monsieur," said Anne. "If the King had desired that the letter should be given to him, madame, he would have demanded it of you himself. But I repeat to you, I am charged with reclaiming it, and if you do not give it up—" "Well?" "He has then charged me to take it from you." "How? What do you say?" "That my orders go so far, madame, and that I am authorized to seek for the suspected paper, even on the person of your Majesty." "What horror!" cried the Queen. "Be kind enough, then, madame, to act more compliantly." "The conduct is infamously violent. Do you know that, monsieur?" "The King commands it, madame. Excuse me." "I will not suffer it. No, no, I would rather die," cried the Queen, in whom the imperious blood of Spain and Austria began to rise. The Chancellor made a profound reverence. Then, with the intention quite patent of not drawing back a foot from the accomplishment of the commission with which he was charged, and as the attendant of an executioner might have done in the chamber of torture, he approached Anne of Austria, from whose eyes at the same instant sprang tears of rage. The Queen was, as we have said, of great beauty. The commission might well be called delicate, and the King had reached in his jealousy of Buckingham the point of not being jealous of anyone else. Without doubt, the Chancellor Ségur looked about at that moment for the rope of the famous bell, but not finding it, he summoned his resolution and stretched forth his hands toward the place where the Queen had acknowledged the paper was to be found. Anne of Austria took one step backward, became so pale that it might be said she was dying, and leaning with her left hand upon a table behind her to keep herself from falling, she with her right hand drew the paper from her bosom and held it out to the keeper of the seals. "There, monsieur, there is that letter," cried the Queen with a broken and trembling voice. "Take it and deliver me from your odious presence." The Chancellor, who on his part trembled with an emotion easily to be conceived, took the letter, bowed to the ground, and retired. The door was scarcely closed upon him when the Queen sank, half fainting, into the arms of her women. The Chancellor carried the letter to the King without having read a single word of it. The king took it with a trembling hand, looked for the address which was wanting, became very pale, opened it slowly, then seeing by the first words that it was addressed to the King of Spain, he read it rapidly. It was nothing but a plan of attack against the cardinal. The queen pressed her brother and the Emperor of Austria to appear to be wounded, as they really were, by the policy of Richelieu, the eternal object of which was the abasement of the House of Austria, to declare war against France, and as a condition of peace to insist upon the dismissal of the cardinal. But as to love, there was not a single word about it in all the letter. The king, quite delighted, inquired if the cardinal was still at the Louvre. He was told that his Eminence awaited the orders of His Majesty in the business cabinet. The king went straight to him. "There, Duke," said he, "you were right and I was wrong. The whole intrigue is political, and there is not the least question of love in this letter. But, on the other hand, there is abundant question of you." The cardinal took the letter and read it with the greatest attention. Then, when he had arrived at the end of it, he read it a second time. "Well, your Majesty," said he, "you see how far my enemies go. They menace you with 2 wars if you do not dismiss me. In your place, in truth, sire, I should yield to such powerful instance, and on my part, it would be a real happiness to withdraw from public affairs." "What say you, Duke?" "I say, sire, that my health is sinking under these excessive struggles and these never-ending labors. I say that according to all probability, I shall not be able to undergo the fatigues of the siege of La Rochelle, and that it would be far better that you should appoint there either Monsieur de Conde, Monsieur de Bassompierre, or some valiant gentleman whose business is war, and not me, who am a churchman, and who am constantly turned aside from my real vocation to look after matters for which I have no aptitude. You would be happier for it at home, sire, and I do not doubt you would be the greater for it abroad." "Monsieur Duke," said the king, "I understand you. Be satisfied. All who are named in that letter shall be punished as they deserve, even the queen herself." "What do you say, sire? God forbid that the queen should suffer the least inconvenience or uneasiness on my account. She has always believed me, sire, to be her enemy, although your Majesty can bear witness that I have always taken her part warmly, even against you. Oh, if she betrayed your Majesty on the side of your honor, it would be quite another thing, and I should be the first to say, 'No grace, sire, no grace for the guilty.' Happily, there is nothing of the kind, and your Majesty has just acquired a new proof of it." "That is true, Monsieur Cardinal," said the king, "and you were right, as you always are. But the queen, not the less, deserves all my anger." "It is you, sire, who have now incurred hers, and even if she were to be seriously offended, I could well understand it. Your Majesty has treated her with a severity—" "It is thus I will always treat my enemies and yours, Duke, however high they may be placed, and whatever peril I may incur in acting severely toward them." "The queen is my enemy, but is not yours, sire. On the contrary, she is a devoted, submissive, and irreproachable wife. Allow me, then, sire, to intercede for her with your Majesty." "Let her humble herself, then, and come to me first." "On the contrary, sire, set the example. You have committed the first wrong, since it was you who suspected the queen." "What? I make the first advances?" said the king. "Never." "Sire, I entreat you to do so." "Besides, in what manner can I make advances first?" "By doing a thing which you know will be agreeable to her." "What is that?" "Give a ball. You know how much the queen loves dancing. I will answer for it. Her resentment will not hold out against such an attention." "Monsieur Cardinal, you know that I do not like worldly pleasures." The queen will only be the more grateful to you, and she knows your antipathy for that amusement. Besides, it will be an opportunity for her to wear those beautiful diamonds which you gave her recently on her birthday, and with which she has since had no occasion to adorn herself."
"We shall see, Monsieur Cardinal, we shall see,"
said the king, who in his joy at finding the queen guilty of a crime which he cared little about, and innocent of a fault of which he had great dread, was ready to make up all differences with her.
"We shall see. But, upon my honor, you are too indulgent toward her."
"Sire," said the cardinal, "leave severity to your ministers. Clemency is a royal virtue. Employ it, and you will find that you derive advantage therein." Thereupon the cardinal, hearing the clock strike 11, bowed low, asking permission of the king to retire, and supplicating him to come to a good understanding with the queen. Anne of Austria, who in consequence of the seizure of her letter expected reproaches, was much astonished the next day to see the king make some attempts at reconciliation with her. Her first move was repellent. Her womanly pride and her queenly dignity had both been so cruelly offended that she could not come round at the first advance. But, over-persuaded by the advice of her women, she at last had the appearance of beginning to forget. The king took advantage of this favorable moment to tell her that he had the intention of shortly giving a fête. A fête was so rare a thing for poor Anne of Austria that at this announcement, as the cardinal had predicted, the last trace of her resentment disappeared, if not from her heart, at least from her countenance. She asked upon what day this fête would take place, but the king replied that he must consult the cardinal upon that head. Indeed, every day the king asked the cardinal when this fête should take place, and every day the cardinal, under some pretext, deferred fixing it. 10 days passed away thus. On the 8th day after the scene we have described, the cardinal received a letter with the London stamp, which only contained these lines: "I have them, but I am unable to leave London for want of money. Send me 500 pistoles, and 4 or 5 days after I have received them, I shall be in Paris." On the same day the cardinal received this letter, the king put his customary question to him. Richelieu counted on his fingers and said to himself, "She will arrive, she says, 4 or 5 days after having received the money. It will require 4 or 5 days for the transmission of the money, 4 or 5 days for her to return. That makes 10 days. Now, allowing for contrary winds, accidents, and a woman's weaknesses, there are 12 days.
"Well, Monsieur Duke,"
said the king,
"have you made your calculations?"
"Yes, sire. Today is the 20th of September. The aldermen of the city give a fête on the 3rd of October. That will fall in wonderfully well. You will not appear to have gone out of your way to please the queen." Then the cardinal added, "Apropos, sire, do not forget to tell her Majesty the evening before the fête that you should like to see how her diamond studs become her." End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Bonacieux at home. It was the second time the cardinal had mentioned these diamond studs to the king. Louis XIII was struck with this insistence, and began to fancy that this recommendation concealed some mystery. More than once the king had been humiliated by the cardinal, whose police, without having yet attained the perfection of the modern police, were excellent, being better informed than himself, even upon what was going on in his own household. He hoped then, in a conversation with Anne of Austria, to obtain some information from that conversation, and afterward to come upon his Eminence with some secret which the cardinal either knew or did not know, but which in either case would raise him infinitely in the eyes of his minister. He went then to the queen, and according to custom accosted her with fresh menaces against those who surrounded her. Anne of Austria lowered her head, allowed the torrent to flow on without replying, hoping that it would cease of itself. But this was not what Louis XIII meant. Louis XIII wanted a discussion from which some light or other might break, convinced as he was that the cardinal had some afterthought and was preparing for him one of those terrible surprises which His Eminence was so skillful in getting up. He arrived at this end by his persistence in accusation. "But," cried Anne of Austria, tired of these vague attacks, "but, sire, you do not tell me all that you have in your heart. What have I done, then? Let me know what crime I have committed. It is impossible that your Majesty can make all this ado about a letter written to my brother." The king, attacked in a manner so direct, did not know what to answer, and he thought that this was the moment for expressing the desire which he was not going to have made until the evening before the fête.
"Madame,"
said he with dignity,
"there will be shortly a ball at the Hôtel de Ville. I wish, in order to honor our worthy alderman, you should appear in ceremonial costume, and above all, ornamented with the diamond studs which I gave you on your birthday. That is my answer."
The answer was terrible. Anne of Austria believed that Louis XIII knew all, and that the cardinal had persuaded him to employ this long dissimulation of 7 or 8 days, which likewise was characteristic. She became excessively pale, leaned her beautiful hand upon a console, which hand appeared like a one of wax, and looking at the king with terror in her eyes, she was unable to reply by a single syllable.
"You hear, madame?"
said the king, who enjoyed the embarrassment to its full extent, but without guessing the cause.
"You hear, madame?"
"Yes, sire, I hear,"
stammered the queen.
"You will appear at this ball?"
"Yes."
"With those studs?"
"Yes."
The queen's paleness, if possible, increased. The king perceived it and enjoyed it with that cold cruelty which was one of the worst sides of his character.
"Then that is agreed,"
said the king.
"And that is all I had to say to you."
"But on what day will this ball take place?"
said Anne of Austria. Louis XIII felt instinctively that he ought not to reply to this question, the queen having put it in an almost dying voice.
"Oh, very shortly, madame," said he, "but I do not precisely recollect the date of the day. I will ask the cardinal."
"It was the cardinal, then, who informed you of this fête?"
"Yes, madame,"
replied the astonished king.
"But why do you ask that?"
"It was he who told you to invite me to appear with these studs?"
"That is to say, madame—"
"It was he, sire. It was he."
"Well, and what does it signify whether it was he or I? Is there any crime in this request?"
"No, sire."
"Then you will appear?"
"Yes, sire."
"That is well,"
said the king, retiring.
"That is well. I count upon it."
The queen made a curtsy, less from etiquette than because her knees were sinking under her. The king went away enchanted.
"I am lost,"
murmured the queen.
"Lost, for the cardinal knows all, and it is he who urges on the king, who as yet knows nothing but will soon know everything. I am lost. My God, my God, my God!"
She knelt upon a cushion and prayed, with her head buried between her palpitating arms. In fact, her position was terrible. Buckingham had returned to London. Madame de Chevreuse was at Tours. More closely watched than ever, the queen felt certain, without knowing how to tell which, that one of her women had betrayed her. Laporte could not leave the Louvre. She had not a soul in the world in whom she could confide. Thus, while contemplating the misfortune which threatened her and the abandonment in which she was left, she broke out into sobs and tears.
"Can I be of service to your Majesty?"
said all at once a voice full of sweetness and pity. The queen turned round sharply, for there could be no deception in the expression of that voice. It was a friend who spoke thus. In fact, at one of the doors which opened into the queen's apartment appeared the pretty Madame Bonacieux. She had been engaged in arranging the dresses and linen in a closet when the king entered. She could not get out, and had heard all. The queen uttered a piercing cry at finding herself surprised, for in her trouble she did not at first recognize the young woman who had been given to her by Laporte.
"Oh, fear nothing, madame," said the young woman, clasping her hands and weeping herself at the queen's sorrows. "I am your majesty's body and soul, and however far I may be from you, however inferior may be my position, I believe I have discovered a means of extricating your majesty from your trouble." "You, oh heaven, you!" cried the queen. "But look at me in the face. I am betrayed on all sides. Can I trust in you?" "Oh, madame," cried the young woman, falling on her knees, "upon my soul, I am ready to die for your majesty." This expression sprang from the very bottom of the heart, and like the first, there was no mistaking it. "Yes," continued Madame Bonacieux, "yes, there are traitors here, but by the holy name of the Virgin, I swear that no one is more devoted to your majesty than I am. Those studs which the king speaks of, you gave them to the Duke of Buckingham, did you not? Those studs were enclosed in a little rosewood box, which he held under his arm. Am I deceived? Is it not so, madame?" "Oh, my God, murmured the queen, whose teeth chattered with fright. "Well, those studs," continued Madame Bonacieux, "we must have them back again." "Yes, without doubt, it is necessary," cried the queen. "But how am I to act? How can it be effected?" "Someone must be sent to the duke." "But who? Who? In whom can I trust?" "Place confidence in me, madame. Do me that honor, my queen, and I will find a messenger." "But I must write." "Oh, yes, that is indispensable. 2 words from the hand of your majesty and your private seal." "But these 2 words would bring about my condemnation, divorce, exile." "Yes, if they fell into infamous hands, but I will answer for these 2 words being delivered to their address." "Oh, my God! I must then place my life, my honor, my reputation in your hands?" "Yes, yes, madame, you must, and I will save them all." "But how? Tell me at least the means." "My husband had been at liberty these 2 or 3 days. I have not yet had time to see him again. He is a worthy, honest man who entertains neither love nor hatred for anybody. He will do anything I wish. He will set out upon receiving an order from me, without knowing what he carries, and he will carry your majesty's letter, without even knowing it is from your majesty, to the address which is on it." The queen took the 2 hands of the young woman with a burst of emotion, gazed at her as if to read her very heart, and seeing nothing but sincerity in her beautiful eyes, embraced her tenderly. "Do that," cried she, "and you will have saved my life. You will have saved my honor. Do not exaggerate the service I have the happiness to render your majesty. I have nothing to save for your majesty. You are only the victim of perfidious plots." That is true, my child," said the queen. "You are right." "Give me then that letter, madame. Time presses." The queen ran to a little table on which were ink, paper, and pens. She wrote 2 lines, sealed the letter with her private seal, and gave it to Madame Bonacieux. "And now," said the queen, "we are forgetting one very necessary thing." "What is that, madame?" "Money."
Madame Bonacieux blushed.
"Yes, that is true,"
said she.
"and I will confess to your Majesty that my husband—" "Your husband has none. Is that what you would say?" "He has some, but he is very avaricious. That is his fault. Nevertheless, let not your Majesty be uneasy. We will find means." "And I have none either," said the queen. Those who have read the memoirs of Madame de Motteville will not be astonished at this reply. "But wait a minute."
Anne of Austria ran to her jewel case.
"Here," said she, "here is a ring of great value, as I have been assured. It came from my brother, the King of Spain. It is mine, and I am at liberty to dispose of it. Take this ring, raise money with it, and let your husband set out. In an hour you shall be obeyed." "You see the address,"
said the queen, speaking so low that Madame Bonacieux could hardly hear what she said.
"To my Lord Duke of Buckingham, London." "The letter shall be given to himself." "Generous girl!"
cried Anne of Austria. Madame Bonacieux kissed the hands of the queen, concealed the paper in the bosom of her dress, and disappeared with the lightness of a bird. 10 minutes afterward she was at home. As she told the queen, she had not seen her husband since his liberation. She was ignorant of the change that had taken place in him with respect to the cardinal, a change which had since been strengthened by 2 or 3 visits from the Comte de Rochefort, who had become the best friend of Bonacieux, and had persuaded him without much trouble that no culpable sentiments had prompted the abduction of his wife, but that it was only a political precaution. She found Monsieur Bonacieux alone. The poor man was recovering with difficulty the order in his house, in which he had found most of the furniture broken and the closets nearly emptied, justice not being one of these 3 things which King Solomon names as leaving no traces of their passage. As to the servant, she had run away at the moment of her master's arrest. Terror had had such an effect upon the poor girl that she had never ceased walking from Paris till she reached Burgundy, her native place. The worthy mercer had, immediately upon re-entering his house, informed his wife of his happy return, and his wife had replied by congratulating him, and telling him that the first moment she could steal from her duties should be devoted to paying him a visit. This first moment had been delayed 5 days, which under any other circumstances might have appeared rather long to Monsieur Bonacieux. But he had, in the visit he had made to the cardinal and in the visits Rochefort had made him, ample subjects for reflection, and as everybody knows, nothing makes time pass more quickly than reflection. This was the more so because Bonacieux's reflections were all rose-colored. Rochefort called him his friend, his dear Bonacieux, and never ceased telling him that the cardinal had a great respect for him. The mercer fancied himself already on the high road to honors and fortune. On her side, Madame Bonacieux had also reflected, but, it must be admitted, upon something widely different from ambition. In spite of herself, her thoughts constantly reverted to that handsome young man, who was so brave and appeared to be so much in love. Married at 18 to Monsieur Bonacieux, having always lived among her husband's friends, people little capable of inspiring any sentiment whatever in a young woman whose heart was above her position, Madame Bonacieux had remained insensible to vulgar seductions. But at this period the title of gentleman had great influence with the citizen class, and D'Artagnan was a gentleman. Besides, he wore the uniform of the Guards, which, next to that of the Musketeers, was most admired by the ladies. He was, we repeat, handsome, young, and bold. He spoke of love like a man who did love, and was anxious to be loved in return. There was certainly enough in all this to turn a head only 23 years old, and Madame Bonacieux had just attained that happy period of life. The couple then, although they had not seen each other for 8 days, and during that time serious events had taken place in which both were concerned, accosted each other with a degree of preoccupation. Nevertheless, Bonacieux manifested real joy and advanced toward his wife with open arms. Madame Bonacieux presented her cheek to him. "Let us talk a little," said she. "How?" said Bonacieux, astonished.
Yes, I have something of the highest importance to tell you.
True, said he, and I have some questions sufficiently serious to put to you. Describe to me your abduction, I pray you.
Oh, that's of no consequence just now,
said Madame Bonacieux. And what does it concern, then, my captivity?
I heard of it the day it happened, but as you were not guilty of any crime, as you were not guilty of any intrigue, as you, in short, knew nothing that could compromise yourself or anybody else, I attached no more importance to that event than it merited.
You speak very much at your ease, madame, said Bonacieux, hurt at the little interest his wife showed in him. Do you know that I was plunged during a day and night in a dungeon of the Bastille?
Oh, a day and night soon pass away. Let us return to the object that brings me here.
What? That which brings you home to me? Is it not the desire of seeing a husband again, from whom you have been separated for a week? Asked the mercer, piqued to the quick.
Yes, that first, and other things afterward.
Speak.
It is a thing of the highest interest, and upon which our future fortune perhaps depends.
The complexion of our fortune has changed very much since I saw you, Madame Bonacieux, and I should not be astonished if in the course of a few months it were to excite the envy of many folks.
Yes, particularly if you follow the instructions I am about to give you.
Me?
Yes, you. There is good and holy action to be performed, monsieur, and much money to be gained at the same time.
Madame Bonacieux knew that in talking of money to her husband, she took him on his weak side. But a man, were he even a mercer, when he had talked for 10 minutes with Cardinal Richelieu, is no longer the same man. Much money to be gained, said Bonacieux, protruding his lip.
Yes, much.
About how much?
1,000 pistoles, perhaps?
What you demand of me is serious, then?
It is indeed.
What must be done?
You must go away immediately. I will give you a paper which you must not part with on any account, and which you will deliver into the proper hands.
And whither am I to go?
To London?
I go to London? Go to... You jest. I have no business in London.
But others wish that you should go there.
But who are those others? I warn you that I will never again work in the dark, and that I will know not only to what I expose myself, but for whom I expose myself.
An illustrious person sends you. An illustrious person awaits you. The recompense will exceed your expectations. That is all I promise you.
More intrigues. Nothing but intrigues. Thank you, madame. I am aware of them now. Monsieur Cardinal has enlightened me on that head.
The Cardinal?
Cried Madame Bonacieux.
Have you seen the Cardinal?
He sent for me, answered the mercer proudly.
And you responded to his bidding, you imprudent man?
Well, I can't say I had much choice of going or not going, for I was taken to him between two guards. It is true also that as I did not know then his eminence, if I had been able to dispense with the visit, I should have been enchanted.
He ill-treated you then? He threatened you?
He gave me his hand and called me his friend. His friend! Do you hear that, madame? I am the friend of the great cardinal.
Of the great cardinal?
Perhaps you would contest his right to that title, madame.
I would contest nothing, but I tell you that the favor of a minister is ephemeral, and that a man must be mad to attach himself to a minister. There are powers above his which do not depend upon a man or the issue of an event. It is to these powers we should rally.
I am sorry for it, madame, but I acknowledge no other power but that of the great man whom I have the honor to serve.
You serve the cardinal?
Yes, madame, and as his servant, I will not allow you to be concerned in plots against the safety of the state, or to serve the intrigues of a woman who is not French and who has a Spanish heart. Fortunately, we have the great cardinal. His vigilant eye watches over and penetrates to the bottom of the heart.
Bonacieux was repeating word for word a sentence which he had heard from the Comte de Rochefort, but the poor wife, who had reckoned on her husband and who in that hope had answered for him to the queen, did not tremble the less, both at the danger into which she had nearly cast herself and at the helpless state to which she was reduced. Nevertheless, knowing the weakness of her husband, and more particularly his cupidity, she did not despair of bringing him round to her purpose.
"Ah, you are a cardinalist then, monsieur, are you?"
cried she.
"And you serve the party of those who maltreat your wife and insult your queen?"
Private interests are as nothing before the interests of all. I am for those who save the state,
said Bonacieux emphatically.
"And what do you know about the state you talk of?"
said Madame Bonacieux, shrugging her shoulders.
"Be satisfied with being a plain, straightforward citizen, and turn to that side which offers the most advantages."
said Bonacieux, slapping a plump round bag, which returned a sound of money.
What do you think of this, Madame Preacher?
Whence comes that money?
You do not guess?
From the cardinal?
From him, and from my friend, the Comte de Rochefort.
The Comte de Rochefort? Why, it was he who carried me off.
That may be, madame.
And you received silver from that man?
Have you not said that that abduction was entirely political?
Yes, but that abduction had for its object the betrayal of my mistress, to draw from me by torture confessions that might compromise the honor and perhaps the life of my august mistress.
Madame, replied Bonacieux, your august mistress is a perfidious Spaniard, and what the cardinal does is well done.
Monsieur,
said the young woman,
I know you to be cowardly, avaricious, and foolish, but I never till now believed you infamous.
Madame, said Bonacieux, who had never seen his wife in a passion, and who recoiled before this conjugal anger, Madame, what do you say?
I say you are a miserable creature,
continued Madame Bonacieux, who saw she was regaining some little influence over her husband.
You meddle with politics, do you? And still more with cardinalist politics? Why, you sell yourself, body and soul, to the demon, the devil, for money.
No, to the cardinal.
It's the same thing,
cried the young woman.
Who calls Richelieu calls Satan.
Hold your tongue, madame. You may be overheard.
Yes, you are right. I should be ashamed for anyone to know your baseness.
But what do you require of me, then? Let us see.
I have told you. You must depart instantly, monsieur. You must accomplish loyally the commission with which I deign to charge you, and on that condition I pardon everything, I forget everything, and what is more,"
and she held out her hand to him,
"I restore my love."
Bonacieux was cowardly and avaricious, but he loved his wife. He was softened. A man of 50 cannot long bear malice with a wife of 23. Madame Bonacieux saw that he hesitated.
"Come, have you decided?"
said she.
"But, my dear love, reflect a little upon what you require of me. London is far from Paris, very far, and perhaps the commission with which you charge me is not without dangers."
"What matters it, if you avoid them?"
"Hold, Madame Bonacieux," said the mercer. "Hold! I positively refuse. Intrigues terrify me. I have seen the Bastille. That's a frightful place, that Bastille. Only to think of it makes my flesh crawl. They threatened me with torture. Do you know what torture is? Wooden points that they stick in between your legs till your bones stick out. No, positively, I will not go. And, morbleu, why do you not go yourself? For in truth, I think I have hitherto been deceived in you. I really believe you are a man, and a violent one, too."
"And you are a woman, a miserable woman, stupid and brutal. You are afraid, are you? Well, if you do not go this very instant, I will have you arrested by the Queen's orders, and I will have you placed in the Bastille which you dread so much."
Bonacieux fell into a profound reflection. He weighed the two angers in his brain, that of the cardinal and that of the queen. That of the cardinal predominated enormously.
"Have me arrested on the part of the queen," said he, "and I will appeal to his eminence."
At once, Madame Bonacieux saw that she had gone too far, and she was terrified at having communicated so much. She for a moment contemplated with fright that stupid countenance, impressed with the invincible resolution of a fool that is overcome by fear.
"Well, be it so,"
said she.
"Perhaps when all is considered you are right. In the long run, a man knows more about politics than a woman, particularly such as, like you, Monsieur Bonacieux, have conversed with the cardinal. And yet it is very hard,"
added she,
"that a man upon whose affection I thought I might depend treats me thus unkindly and will not comply with any of my fancies."
"That is because your fancies go too far,"
replied the triumphant Bonacieux,
"and I mistrust them."
"Well, I will give it up then,"
said the young woman, sighing.
"It is well as it is. Say no more about it."
"At least you should tell me what I should have to do in London,"
replied Bonacieux, who remembered a little too late that Rochefort had desired him to endeavor to obtain his wife's secrets.
"It is of no use for you to know anything about it,"
said the young woman, whom an instinctive mistrust now impelled to draw back.
"It was about one of those purchases that interest women, a purchase by which much might have been gained."
But the more the young woman excused herself, the more important Bonacieux thought the secret which she declined to confide to him. He resolved then to hasten immediately to the residence of the Comte de Rochefort and tell him that the queen was seeking for a messenger to send to London.
"Pardon me for quitting you, my dear Madame Bonacieux," said he, "but not knowing you would come to see me, I had made an engagement with a friend. I shall soon return, and if you will wait only a few minutes for me, as soon as I have concluded my business with that friend, as it is growing late, I will come back and reconduct you to the Louvre."
"Thank you, monsieur. You are not brave enough to be of any use to me whatever,"
replied Madame Bonacieux.
"I shall return very safely to the Louvre all alone."
"As you please, Madame Bonacieux,"
said the ex-mercer.
"Shall I see you again soon?"
"Next week I hope my duties will afford me a little liberty, and I will take advantage of it to come and put things in order here, as they must necessarily be much deranged."
"Very well. I shall expect you. You are not angry with me?"
"Not the least in the world."
"Till then."
"Till then."
Bonacieux kissed his wife's hand and set off at a quick pace.
"Well,"
said Madame Bonacieux when her husband had shut the street door and she found herself alone,
"that imbecile lacked but one thing, to become a cardinalist, and I, who have answered for him to the queen, I who have promised my poor mistress, my God, my God! She will take me for one of those wretches with whom the palace swarms, and who are placed about her as spies. Monsieur Bonacieux, I never did love you much, but now it is worse than ever. I hate you, and on my word you shall pay for this."
At the moment she spoke these words, a rap on the ceiling made her raise her head, and a voice which reached her through the ceiling cried, "Dear Madame Bonacieux, open for me the little door on the alley, and I will come down to you." End of chapter 17.
And D'Artagnan to the rescue. There we go. Wow. Okay, Constance is so cool. Actually saying to her husband, yeah, no, never mind. You're not brave enough. I mean, wow. That whole chapter. There's going to be questionable things happening with women in our Me Too, in our post-Me Too world. But Dumas, for his time, yeah, I really like Constance a lot. And I really, really don't like Richelieu. I can't tell if he means what he says or if he just really doesn't like the queen. But when he talks about like accounting for weather and a woman's weakness, I don't know. I haven't decided yet. I just know I don't like him. All right. It was a long episode. I'm going to let you go. I hope you have a great week. Take care of yourself. Come and join us over on Patreon. We will be doing our movie night for people who are at the Mina Harker level and above on Patreon. Movie night will be Thursday the 20th because I will be at the beach and largely incommunicado on the 27th. There will not be an episode that week. There's no way I'm going to be able to get one done in time. So I will be talking to you this Friday the 14th, next Friday the 21st, and then I'll be back with you on August 4th. All right, you take care of yourself. I'll talk to you soon. Check out our Etsy if you have a chance. It's all linked to in the show notes. And you take care of yourself. All right, bye. A big thanks to all the CraftLit listeners who support the show by being a premium audio member via craftlit.com/premium or via patreon.com/craftlit. Your support for the show is what's kept us going since 2006. If you feel like getting free audio pretty much every week, please consider supporting the show by heading over to patreon.com/craftlit and pledging what you feel the show is worth to you. If you can't support the show that way, consider leaving a review at iTunes or at our facebook.com/craftlit page, or follow at CraftLit on Twitter and share the show with your followers too. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.